I think because we touched on it last time in our chat, masculinity, it's such a broad topic. And a lot of guys get their noses out of place. And I just want to say at the outset, this is just two guys sharing their own pedestrian opinion about it. It makes me laugh when people think you're speaking from some sort of pulpit, as tablets in stone. You're writing down laws for everyone to follow, and people start objecting. But yeah, in terms of masculinity, it's become. My perception is it's become a lot more grey as the years go on. There wasn't this much. How can I put it? There wasn't this much people getting their noses out of joint, and I think it's because it's disappearing more and more. It's become so vague. It's getting lost. And I started to think about, you've got what is a male, what is a man, and what is masculine. You can
Right.
sort of say the male is purely biological. That's easy. That's not grey at all. Although,
Well, I take that there is an exception to that, though. I mean, one of the things that we've sort of fallen victim to culturally in the West, both in your country and certainly in North America, is the idea of gender. Uh, they have made being male gray, but now they're because the theory of these idiot feminists is that sex is purely socialized, which is just insane from the beginning, but that's why they've switched the language to call it gender. And one of the things I like to do is refuse to cooperate with that. I don't have a gender. I have a sex.
well, I suppose that's where they can sort of grey the conversation and grey the area of getting anywhere at all, is to regard everything as gender and everything is fluid. I suppose you and I, it's not going to be popular, but talk from a binary standpoint, and not a classical binary standpoint, whether or not people like it or not. Just to sort of talk in terms of what's been lost, and how things may have changed in terms of perception and how it affects men.
I don't see that pissing off too many in our respective audiences. I do think in terms of, mainstream, particularly gender ideological activists out there, they do get upset when you talk about things in binary terms. Of course, binary terms is how the world actually operates, outside of their imagination about what defines men, masculinity, women, sex. We have a binary, male and female. And there's some fringe stuff to discuss about that, but for the most part, that's where it's at.
And I suppose it might be something in terms of the difference between the male mind and female mind, is that the binary aspect isn't so much a narrow aspect. It's kind of going towards a simplified clarification, so you can actually get somewhere or try to understand something. Whereas when you're trying to spin 56 genders and 56 ideas at once and give credence and respect to everything all the time, you actually get nowhere. So, and I think it might actually be a male or masculine trait, rather than. So it's almost like the responsibility of trying to think simplistically like this, only having two options and seeing where we can get with it, while recognizing there are grey areas in between, but the two dominant polarities are male and female, masculine, feminine.
Masculine, feminine, male and female. And I think where we can sort of run afoul in a conversation is where, and I've seen this in some elements of the manosphere, is when the conversation becomes prescriptive, of what you need to be masculine, what you must be. in order to be considered a man, or a woman for that matter.
Well, here's a question for you. Is masculinity important or necessary today?
Absolutely. It's funny that we have these ivory tower conversations from people who have no idea, how the cold air coming through the vents during the summer actually got there, and what happens when they flush their toilet, as though they think their toilet is a magic box where their excrement just disappears and nothing exists past that point. Yes, it takes masculine energy, men, risk takers, workers, out there doing what it takes in order to run the world, or run most of the world that we don't see. All the blue collar jobs, which are, yes, it's one thing to work in an office, but you have to build it.
Yeah.
You have to design it, and you have to maintain it after that. And all of that requires energy that I would typically define as masculine. I just wouldn't take the next apparently logical step and saying, well, in order to be a man, this is what you must do. You must build, you must perform in some way.
Yeah. Look, I tend to do this quite a bit. Like, I try and step outside as the observer and see, how and why perhaps the other side operates this way, gynocentrism. And we can talk about a whole range of things, and we usually do. But I get that now they want women to contribute to society, greasing society with women, not just men, as in the past. I get that. And so, the first thing they did was erase femininity, or make that clownish, and make women try and pantomime men's masculinity, or former what it was. And it's almost
even as
like
they're criticizing it.
Yeah, it's almost like sometimes I think, why does gynocentrism dislike masculinity so much? It's almost like, and the classic definitions of it, things like strength, hierarchy, leadership, order, respect, honor, those kind of things. And sometimes I think because women are now in the external world and trying to do these things that men once did, almost solely, that they do such a bad job at it generally, that because they've gotten rid of their own femininity and sort of let go of that and amputated that they want to get rid of them, they want to make masculinity clownish too, so that we can all sort of just mix in this melding pot, and there can't actually be any hierarchical standards or any sort of measures of excellence. Then you'd actually start to sort of see the difference between the feminine and the masculine, like the inherent traits that one is better at generally than the other. Yeah, all exceptions duly noted. And, everyone wants to be a superhero and celebrity, but generally sort of when all things are sorted out, when people's capabilities and their wills and all of that is sorted out, it was a good way of organizing masculinity and femininity. So I think like now how they want everyone to be working and taxed, and everyone to be sort of controlled in this kind of system.
Well, that's their claim. But we find when you examine where they advocate for that so-called androgyny to take over and actually run things, that it stops the moment danger enters the picture. We've had 50 years of feminism. 50 years ago, 93% of workplace fatalities were male. Today, 93% of workplace fatalities are male. The numbers barely took a bump in combat deaths. And as a matter of fact, the number of female deaths went up slightly, ever so slightly, back during the Gulf War, and then went back down again once we found out that people didn't have a taste for coffins with female bodies, stamped members missing, being shipped back to the United States from whatever our imperialistic endeavors were at the time. But it's just another round of hypocrisy. We want women in the corner office, but not in the basement, not in the furnace, not on top of roofs or climbing skyscrapers. They're not screaming for more female ditch diggers. What they're looking for is that upper 1% of men who actually do run things, and saying, there, if we put women in their positions, then we'll have equality. It's nonsense.
Yeah, I think it's going to be very hard, if not impossible, because it's hardwired into women that they're biologically, reproductively, and historically, they've never been as forthright and actionable to sort of make their stamp on the world. It's always been passively, like throwing the bait out to get men to do what they want. They sort of tend to be emotionally more skillful at manipulation. I think so. There's always sort of this. There's this skill underlying getting what they want that men actually. Again, it's a difference between feminine and masculine too. And sort of they keep running up against that. And so any of the hard stuff that happens in society, those instincts kick in. If it's too hard, and I can't, and I don't have the natural will to find it appealing to go even harder. I mean, I always cite things like things, pedestrian things that a lot of guys enjoy, like going to the gym. Guys actually love the pain, the sweat, and the work. And if you really pay attention, and if you have an interest like you and I do, you read between the lines, and you listen to the drums, and you look at the advertising. And because I've worked in the advertising field most of my career, I remember whenever we did advertising for men as opposed to women, it's vastly, vastly different. And the funny thing is, when you're in the boardroom brainstorming generalizations, which are perfectly normal in the advertising field, because the whole marketing and advertising industry works on generalization and absolutely nothing else. And I remember when we'd advertise, say, for fitness, the difference between men and women is the poster for men would have a guy with muscles, sweating, grimacing with his teeth showing, almost in pain. And that kind of image, that warrior kind of painful work image, would motivate a man. Whereas doing a fitness image for a woman, she's not sweating, she looks beautiful, she's smiling, she's happy, there's no pain at all. And so the masculine and feminine, if people want to be real about it, is very, very different. How it's perceived by females, and how it's perceived by the opposite sex. But yeah, I think the frustration, especially for guys these days, is that we're buying the marketing, and we're buying the politics, that we can't actually have an honest conversation. And what I find, the one thing that keeps coming up over and over again is, whenever I think about masculinity, is not just, as feminists like to think about it, and when I say feminist, I say most women, because they love smiling and saying nothing when feminists speak for them publicly. They don't denounce them. They don't do anything. So I contend that the vast majority of women, if they're not feminists, they let feminism speak for them, and they say nothing.
They're feminists by omission, for sure.
Yeah, so most modern women are feminists to me anyway. But what I find is that whenever you talk to them and you listen to them on media, is they see masculinity as almost like a boy putting on a superhero cape. They see it as something clownish, passé, boys with their toys, us putting on some sort of mask and acting like a hero and a tough guy. And it's like, grow up and take off the masculinity suit. And sometimes I think it's because they were convinced long ago to throw away their femininity, and they've severed that cord. They've severed that relationship to men and the relationship they had with themselves in terms of their strengths, in terms of femininity, that now, because they're on their own and they're attached so much to the system and the government and everything, is that its counterpart, or what was that, masculinity, they do their best to shame it. for it to be non-existent.
And yet, nothing has changed in what fundamentally sexually attracts women to men. Not a thing. I've seen it said before, and I totally believe it, that if you want to understand a culture, forget the psychologists, forget the sociologists, look at advertising, which is something you know something about. If you want to understand what motivates people, look at how we advertise, because advertising runs purely off of a profit motive for getting the message right to men and women. And I know that you talked about an image of a man sweating and grunting and grimacing, almost in pain. Not only is that motivating for men, it's sexually motivating for women. They want to see men. That's what turns them on. It's why all these guys that have, man bun themselves into being more effeminate find themselves lonely without women, while she hops on the back of a Harley with a guy. Now, she may have just left a gender studies course where she's talking about the pitfalls of masculinity. We saw this, oh my God, what was her name? The woman for he for she, Emma Watson, or
Emma Watson, yeah.
Yeah. She does this pro-effeminate masculinity gig and basically challenges all men to drop the facade and be a more effeminate supporter of women. And she runs off with jocks. And that's how she spends her time. They're not really fooling anybody, I think, in the red pill community, but the world is buying it enough that you can actually have a female James Bond. And the world will continue to nod their heads and say, oh, how wonderful, a female James Bond, even as it does very poorly at a box office. These recasting women into these roles has not done well for the movies overall that have done it, but because it's not even realistic. Because they aren't being feminine. And
yeah, they're gonna keep pounding that drum until it like a metronome, until people just nod their heads to it, because it's almost like they've made masculinity synonymous with racism or something, even uttering the word. Because if they just concentrate on the traits, the sort of high bar traits of what used to be masculinity in a classical sense, like on strength, blah blah blah, then we can sort of start dispensing with masculine and feminine, and we're all equal, and we can politically sort of see ourselves on this sort of level playing field, and then people start talking less and less about the male and the female and their respective natures that can actually help the things we're trying to do. I think it's hamstringing us even more and more if we erase the masculine and feminine that are hardwired into that classical binary aspect of what we are as animals. Because no matter what you try and do socially, is people are going to continually be on meds more and more when you tell them, rather than simplifying life and telling them, the reason you might be feeling this way, or the reason why you're so confused and you don't know where to turn, is because you're getting 1,000 different messages flying off in every direction at once, rather than a more again, not binary as in sexual, but binary as in like there is a clearer way that used to be passed on from mentors and from mothers to daughters and from fathers to son in the past. And it used to be a lot more linear, and it was foundational. And then once you sort of got that, you got the biology, you got the common sense, you got the sort of stability, then you could go off and be your own individual. Later on you could go off and be your Hemingway. And in these days where almost everything's permissible, once you've got the grounding of biology, male and female nature, what is our strengths and weaknesses, then if you've got some will and desire, go off and, call yourself anything you want to call yourself, do anything you want to do, great. But trying to confuse people intentionally as soon as they get out of the womb, I think just plays into the hands of, not that there's some great sort of scheme that, but plays into the hands of sort of people that love sort of controlling society in certain ways. And it just sort of mutes and dilutes people individually. You'd notice this, the increased rates of suicide, depression, pharmaceuticals, just all that kind of shit. The insecurity of the individual is gone. There's nothing to stand on. And if you get rid of the masculine, the last place where I see sort of conceptually, one of the last places left that kind of any kind of stability, security, grounding, courage, strength, all that kind of good stuff resides. The moment that's extinguished, it doesn't look like a nice world to live in, where everyone's so confused they don't know what's up or down.
No, it's a terrible world to live in, and it's continuing to circle the drain, mainly, I think, because one of the biggest mistakes we ever made culturally was giving women so much power. Women are, in my opinion, and I'll get some criticism for this, they're inherently destructive. They're inherently destructive of their relationships. I can tell you from decades of working with men, I can't even begin to count how many men who told me she would rather see the ship she's in sink before she would own responsibility and keep it afloat.
Mm. Well, they have a natural look. The feminine has a natural attraction, leaning in towards chaos, surprises.
The marriage.
Yeah, like just change, surprise me. Whereas the masculine, the male, has a leaning towards an attraction to sort of order, sort of routine.
Yeah, but give me a second on this, because I think it extends really far past that. You look at feminist policies, they undermine the very things that keep the world stable. They undermine families. Families are part of the fabric that keeps the world stable. I mean, I fully support the marriage strike. I think nobody in his right mind would get married these days, but I can't deny socially that families have been the foundation of a stable society for a long time. They when they were honored and respected, when it was difficult to get a divorce, they made the world go round. Masculine values, which are now being shunned. The sort of assertiveness and dominance of men in certain areas is now being absolutely demonized. And what do we have? We're starting to fill prisons with fatherless boys from families that women and feminists have wrecked. They're creating all sorts of chaos and dysfunction, and left to their own devices, they're like children in a kindergarten, that if you take an authority figure away from them, they will destroy the room. And I see that happening all around us all the time. And it's, no, I would not rob women of the right to vote. I wouldn't take their rights away. But I would have had a lot more thoughtfulness about how we approach things like family law and other matters, and what we allow to pass for education in our institutions of higher learning. They are teaching values and indoctrinating people to do things like undermine and destroy the psychological profession. It's absolutely insane. Everything they touch turns to shit. And sooner or later, we have to look at the fact that it was the saving factor that could have prevented so much of this is masculine values. And the men failed.
I mean, just look at even, you mentioned psychology and stuff. The more you look into it, the more women started to get involved in it. Psychology used to belong under the rubric of philosophy back in the day. But now it's sort of become its own thing, because it's the sort of the scientific and philosophical mind sort of, it's not strong in most women. Try and talk to a woman about allegory and metaphors.
Good luck.
It's kind of like, if I had any hair, I'd be pulling it out. That's my biggest frustration with many women that I had and have in my life, is that everything needs to be literal. And so it's almost impossible to have deep and meaningful conversations where you sort of connect concepts and you expand thinking, because everything is so literal. The moment, that they'll watch them. That's why most women don't get the Matrix as much as men do. It's such a very simple concept to men, but and even trying to talk historically, you talk about sort of things like Zeus and Achilles and all these sort of mythopoetic classical stories and allegories, like these stories that described the human being, aspiration, failings, what to do, what not to do, how far to go, trials and tribulations, the extent to which the hero's journey would go in life. And it's just something that's something that men kind of resonate with and get and understand the allegories involved. But to women, it's so literal. And you see it today even with comedy, that the biggest people that are triggered are the ones that take everything so literally, and they cannot see the metaphors and the figurative examples that people are trying to sort of say through these things. And I always wonder, Jesus Christ, the more they get in power, the more gynocentrism expands without the ability to think abstractly and think with allegory, metaphor, and symbolism. Just the more chaos and the more people are going to be sort of insecure, or fighting each other, censoring each other, because they don't have the confidence and the self-assuredness to be able to understand what a metaphor is without thinking literally all the time that someone's always trying to attack them.
Well, yeah, I think excuse me while I'm fiddling with some lighting here, my general experience with women and, for instance, trying to explain a metaphor, an allegory, or an archetype, the response generally is, what do you mean by that? This is the level that they deal on. I mean, I know, yes, for those of you who will freak out, there are exceptions. I'm not denying it. But we have great masters of literature that were men for a reason. We don't have founding mothers of psychology for a reason. All the greatest master poets, the great symphony writers, people who understood the depths of the human intellectual and emotional experience, overwhelmingly male. Nobel laureates, overwhelmingly male. There's a reason for this. And I think there's a lot of envy in women. Well, first, I think fundamentally there's anger at the core of their issues. And what they found, the one ace card that women have is, no matter what they say, no matter how outlandish, people will listen to them. I was just discussing with Tom Golden a story of a feminist group that were separating hens from roosters and smashing eggs because the hens had been raped. And they were serious about this.
The character trait I just thought of that sort of probably sums it up. Women, because they've divorced themselves from men, so to speak, like it's almost like they've married the government, and they're like that woman that's pissed off because she's in a shitty marriage now. She's locked herself in.
Right.
So she's married to the government, and now she's pissed off because it's not a comfortable existence.
Now, that's a beautiful metaphor that I don't think very many women would understand. But
and I can understand that frustration. Imagine yourself as a guy, like you married the wrong woman, and now you've got this very limited claustrophobic life where there's no freedom or autonomy, and you just sort of lash out at the world. You're pissed off. You're an alcoholic. You're just not the human being you want to be, and you're annoyed, but you don't want to look in the mirror or do anything about it. You don't want to take the courage to actually go, you know what, maybe I was wrong. Fuck this marriage. I'm divorcing this person or this government or whatever. But they kind of, maybe it sort of ties into their need for security that, okay, we've got all this great stuff. I don't have to worry about money anymore. I always have a soft landing, that I'm married to the government, but I'm in such a shitty marriage to the government that everything else in my life is bad. It's like a man staying at a job only for the money, and his boss is awful. He works himself to death. He can't enjoy his life. And I think sort of women have that aspect to them, that they don't like the marriage they're in now, this independent, gynocentric, feminist narrative that they're married to and that they've bought into. And the only positive thing they've got is the so-called ego boost they get, and the power and the money that they can go out every weekend and buy shoes with, and no man can tell them what to do, and they've got infinite options, so they think. That's all. It's like a man just staying in a job for the money. And this frustration with women is that they don't want to let go of that job just because of the money, yet the rest of their life is completely fucked.
They don't want to pay attention to the fact that in reality, most of them have worked their butts off to get to some crappy mid-level position in a cubicle where they're sitting there for 8 or 9 hours a day, missing their kids with bags under their eyes, but still trying to live by the narrative that this is empowering to them. I'd still maintain that the problem starts fundamentally. It's like when you leave men to their own devices, they go to the moon and they land spacecraft on comets and cure disease. When you leave women to their own devices, they come up with gender studies.
Yeah. And this is the other thing, I think. Women feel so insecure and triggered, I think, today, because they've severed the feminine. They want nothing to do with it. That it's like men don't get their back up when you generalize about men, or, you could say men love cars. And I don't get my back up because I don't love cars as much as the next man. It's a general fact. Generally, men love cars, or men are sexually driven. I agree. I might not be as much as the next guy, but men are. But because I'm still in touch with the reality of what a man is, or what masculinity is, the more, and this is the other thing, the more confident you are in yourself, and the more confident you are in reality in relation to yourself, you don't get triggered by what is true out there. Because if it's like someone saying to me, human, you don't love your dad. You're going like, whatever, I don't care. I know I do. But it's almost like these women don't have an identity because they've gotten rid of the feminine, that every fucking thing triggers them. It's like,
especially the truth.
Especially, reality, it's like, again, married to the government that pats them on the head like a child and says, we'll censor everyone, we'll make the world a soft cotton wool place for you. And anytime you feel awful, just raise your voice, we'll hear and we'll come running like some hero and protect you.
When you think about it, this is not one iota different than the true examined lifestyle of traditional women. Peter Wright dug up another book by Esther Villar, the woman who wrote The Manipulated Man. Fantastic book. He found another book by her called The Polygamous Sex. And she describes in this that women's role in the home is to enhance their neoteny, their childlikeness, as much as possible in order to promote the parental brain in men, the parental brain. That our fixed relationship with women when you don't want to look at it through a Freudian lens. It's enough to really turn your stomach when you really start thinking about, we have like sexy outfits called baby dolls, and women make themselves look as young as possible, and they act childlike. You even have women baby talk as grown women with a pile of stuffed animals on their bed. And they bring this to an adult relationship, and they send all the cues that in every other animal on earth, every other mammal and many non-mammals, cues the parental brain, the instinct to take care of, and to do so in the light of a child. And this is what I see in feminism. This is what I see in women who marry the state and forswear all men except whatever men will pay their bills. And they become infantile. Feminism is ultimately an infantilizing movement for women, but it's not that far from women in their natural state. I think one of the biggest challenges that men have is turning, if they're conscious enough as men, is turning an emotional toddler into a grown woman once they pair bond. And it's a very difficult job to get done, because her instinct is to be as neotenous and childlike as possible in order to inspire a man to sacrifice on her behalf.
Yeah, and today they're playing two opposing positions. When I listen to what you say, the Freudian perspective is today they operate just from two positions of what will give them power to sort of get their way with men. They'll either act neotenous or they'll act like the mother. So they'll be the dominant one, that's or the authoritative figure over the man, or if that doesn't work, if the gynocentric feminist script doesn't work, they revert back to their biology and look up at you and bat their eyelids. And so it's almost like, and nowhere in that equation is actually operating from a position, as in classical femininity, of something that's for them, for women, something that they can operate through that will give them satisfaction, not just in relation to getting what they want from men. But yeah, when you talk about that, it makes me think, and it makes me think in the past of women I've been with, when they run up against a wall with me, they can't get their way. I constantly observe them shifting between trying to be the mother and then trying to be a child to get their way with me.
If scolding doesn't work, maybe begging will.
And it becomes laughable to say people say now that are called red pill, that you naturally have an inclination to sort of read between the lines. That, I have an interest in this stuff, so it sticks out to me like dog's balls. So it's not subtle to me. It's not covert when I observe it. The language is actually very visible to me when I observe people and when I talk to people, especially with women. The stuff that they try and get away with, and a lot of times they're not sort of scheming it consciously. You see it operating in them quite naturally. Yep. Them vacillate between being the mother or being Bambi. And it's kind of like, I know what you're doing. Can you just stop and act like a human being?
And the answer is no. In most cases, they can't. I don't think most women are capable of it. And the ones that are capable of it have to go through some pretty rigorous training in order to get there. It's not easy for them. And I'm not saying that in a condescending way. This is really what we socialize in women. We teach them that being childlike is going to get them their way. And we also teach them that if being childlike doesn't get you your way, then your anger about that is really righteous indignation. And you have every reason and right to take your frustration out on the man who's not fulfilling your childlike needs. And we see them vacillate back and forth. What I find interesting on this is on the other end in men. is how many men, and I'm talking about men that wouldn't take a cross word in public from another man, and guys that are physically fit and strong in every masculine way you can imagine, and they see a woman shed a tear or talk baby talk or some way get childlike, and these guys are utterly defenseless. They get tongue-tied, they don't know what to say, they don't know how to defend themselves, and they end up bowing their heads and saying, okay, you're right.
Yeah, that's biology. It's the same. I notice it in myself. Is no matter how much I know and how stoically strong I can feel, when a short skirt walks by, I can feel a reflex,
Sure.
and the figurative tongue starting to hang out and salivate, depending on how many biological markers are coming off this woman that sort of resonate with me as a man. But most guys, yeah, it's just jumping out of a plane. The adrenaline of when biology kicks in, it's very hard. And the hard thing is, it's a drug for the non-intellectually curious. You go with it, and it feels better than everything. I mean, what's the downside in that moment? I feel great. I'm talking to her. I get sex. I don't know what your problem is, human, or anyone who's taken a bit of a red pill. And the thing is, it's like the masculine mind, again, it tends to be a better chess player than the gynocentric mind. I won't say feminine mind, because it's femininity's been replaced by gynocentrism and feminism. But yeah, it's just the worst chess play as far as I can see.
Well, I think it's important for men to remember too, is that when they're triggered by women's weakness, it's said that for women, their weakness is their greatest strength, and that's absolutely true. And when men are triggered by that and they're disempowered by it and they don't know what to say or what to do, it's important to remember that's not your masculine mind at that moment. That is your parental brain. They've written books on this subject, that when the parental brain is triggered, you adopt a whole new set of rules. And even your values get tossed out the window in order to respond to the mandates of the parental brain. I don't know if it's possible for really younger guys to overcome that.
Do you think it has been somewhat easier for, say, non-reproductively inclined men like you and I to recognize that about ourselves and sort of the male biology in and of itself, to kind of go, oh, I know what's happening here. And given that I'm not as reproductively inclined as the average male, as in I don't want kids, then why the fuck am I treating you like a neotenous child? I don't even want children, so act like an adult. Like we can actually demand that women raise their bar in relation to us because we don't want a lot of the neoteny that's being triggered.
Well, I think that there's sort of a mixture of truths in there. Certainly, my age has a lot to do with my ability to overcome those instincts. I won't be manipulated by any woman anymore. It's impossible for them to do that. As a matter of fact, I rather enjoy making sport out of foiling their plans to manipulate. It's easy for me. Could I have done that in my 20s? I doubt it. But I also didn't know in my 20s what I know now. I was even inclined in my 20s once I got so much shit from a woman, even though I was very reproductively inclined, I would draw a line and say no.
Oh, okay. So you were even in your youth.
Yeah, I mean, I did have limits. I had lack of limits, like in a lot of ways, but I would only take it so far. I mean, I've seen guys that ruin their lives completely trying to chase a false notion of love with a woman. And I was never inclined to do that. But I made my share of mistakes in my youth, but I do think that there is the potential for some younger men to avoid being one of the ones that has to write me an email 10 years from now saying, okay, she's taken the house and the kids and wrecked my reputation and is sleeping with my brother. And I get emails like that from guys who have ignored all the warning signs and pursued the parental brain.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you think also, I was listening to a conversation you, Paul, and Janice were having recently about the Miley Cyrus article about heterosexuality collapsing today, supposedly. Do you think that's another thing? Like, we sort of mentioned, trying to sort of get rid of the past, shame antiquated notions of masculinity and femininity, and now even heterosexuality, like get rid of it all so we can sort of be this whole mess of unorganized, uncalibrated people who are sort of just trying to climb all over each other, trying to sort of get anywhere. Do you think that plays a lot into it as well? Like getting rid of heterosexuality and getting people against each other and erasing a lot of the simplistic ways we sort of at least had some sort of compass about how to go about life with?
Well, I think that they have succeeded into getting an awful lot of young men to act like pansies. And that makes swearing off heterosexuality a lot easier. If these guys had rebelled and hung on to their balls and to their spines, I don't think that would be near as an appealing proposition as it would be to a lot of them now.
It also begs the question, holding on to your balls in relation to what though? Because you've got the personality that if they're honest, if a really good psychiatrist got them on the couch, you determine that actually their perspective in life, what they're driven by, is ultimately to be defined and validated as a man by women and by society, that human doing aspect that tends to be sort of hardwired as a man. And that brought me to something as well I wanted to ask you is, do you think masculinity is subjective? Like, can it be personal, or is it always relational? Like, can you only be masculine in relation to people, the world, the respect of other men? Or is it possible to be masculine on your own in the woods somewhere? That saying, if a tree falls in the woods and no one's there to hear it, is it fucking masculine? So
well, I think relational masculinity is what has led most men to their deaths and to ridiculous, idiotic sacrifice for women. And
sure, but what about sort of the civilization that's been built through masculinity? A lot of that's been relational too.
Well, yeah, it's definitely a two-edged sword, but I don't think that you have to settle for relational masculinity at the cost that it comes by in modern times. I mean, it always had a cost. They named some highways that have been built dead man highways because so many people get killed building them, and other projects and like that. That's sort of part of the masculinity that you're talking about that's relational, and it's driven by society's needs. But we do live in an age where we do have some choices. My masculinity is not contingent on what any motherfucker on this planet thinks of who I am. That's a choice. Whether women think I'm masculine, I don't care. I know I'm masculine, and that is good enough for me.
I suppose again, the language today, like sometimes I'm not sure what to think, because to me that's just knowing yourself as a man. Because I think I heard Stephen Molyneux recently say that his definition of masculinity is basically protection and provision. So it is pretty relational. Like it's about.
Yeah, and I think he's wrong about that.
Yeah. Look, I think it also can come down to the particular personality type you've got. So say you and I, we don't respect ourselves if we don't place ourselves first. And then from there, we're quite happy, proud, and we feel good about contributing to the world and other people and cooperating. But if we place ourselves second, it's whenever I place myself second and I know I'm lying to myself and I'm just saying yes to a woman or society and living a life I don't want to live, I feel like I've touched a sticky doorknob. Like
I bet in your view, you probably have diminished your masculinity to some degree in doing that.
Yeah, or identity, which happens to be, again, is it relational or not? Look, I'm just sort of thinking out loud.
Yeah, and I'm speculating along with you, but I would have to say that ultimately, if we take a Maslow-esque look at this through that filter, that to self-actualize, you're going to have to depend on your own interpretation of who you are and what you are. That ultimately you're going to have to transcend what the world wants from you. Because if we're really honest, what the world wants from men is to suffer in silence and give all our shit away to people who are not working for it. That is what's wanted. And if we die for it, we're heroes. That is relational masculinity to me. And so at my age, I've moved on to the point, you know what? I figured out a long time ago I was shit at working on cars. I used to have an empty spot in myself about that. It's like, God, all my male buddies, they're turning wrenches. They know exactly what to do. And I was jealous and I felt inadequate in that way. I got over that.
Yeah. You start to realize different people are good at different things. I mean, that stuff is good when you're really young and you don't know much at all. That's a massive strength to be sort of physically sort of engaged with the world in such a tactile way with someone like you or I who are probably a little bit more cerebral and creative. And you feel like, oh shit, and you sort of you feel like you don't have much strength at all because you can't do these ostensibly tough guy things.
Yep.
But then as you get older, I always started to, I felt myself grow just conceptually. Like I started to see myself peer over these people that I actually looked up to that were these tough guys in high school. And I actually saw them getting smaller because all they were was the guy with the wrench who chased after pussy and got into fights. And I started to sort of notice the strength was in people who had something to say, who are actually intelligent, and who saw the world in a different way. Now, maybe that's
learned to say, you may be able to go in there and, rip that carburetor out and rebuild it and put it back in. But guess what? I can get that done with my finger pushing on the telephone. Which one of us is better?
Yeah. Look, but then those guys, again, in terms of masculinity, it's like those guys that say, well, that they term that as a feminine trait. Women do that. Sure. They call up the gardener. And I kind of, I like observing that in myself too. Like a lot of things I'll admit, I don't have the typical masculine traits of many men who can grab a wrench and fix a car and who would sort of die for their family and are red-blooded supporters of their football team. I'm cut from a very different cloth. But I know that when I get talking with some of those men, I don't admire much about them. And I think as I get older, those type of men, not that they admire more about me, but they they want to lean into life a bit more the way you and I are, the way writers are, the way intellectuals are, because I mean, youth is just built for sex and the physical. And when that kind of man, when he's had his day, past middle age now, you can't play with those tools anymore. all you're left with is your mind and a sensible way of operating the world. You know, if you're stuck chasing pussy and fixing cars when you're a 50, 60-year-old man, I don't know, it's like living a life of looking at photographs every day.
Yeah, you've only got your memories and bad elbows to show for it.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you have to kind of transcend that at some point, and some guys do, good on them.
Mm-hmm.
But in terms of masculinity as well, not to get straight too far, of course, is yeah, that relational aspect is something I thought was interesting because it's been watered down so much that it's almost like you can't even use the. Have you even noticed that in public you can barely use the word masculine? It's almost like you're mentioning. It's almost like the word porn can be uttered a lot easier than the word masculine.
Yes, and that is the world we live in, and that is, to me, that with the enabling and complicity of men, this is the world that women have built. That, and it's the very thing that still they are attracted to, is masculine. That's what gets women's attention more than any of this effeminate shit. Yet there's somehow now a prohibition on talking about masculinity except to deride it.
Yeah, yeah. It's a tough one, because I think for the young guy, it must be so tough to have this coursing through your veins, to want nothing more than the female, and not knowing how to go about it today, because the whole script today it's like a role in a movie that's just written for her, and he's supposed to play in it, though he hasn't got a script at all, other than to peek over her shoulder and try and mimic how a female acts or approves of, to actually be in this movie. And there's almost no roles for men, and the only way, it's a scary thought. I think it's almost like men have to be more courageous than they ever were in the past. But then the next thing I think of is, for fucking what? For women? And this is the thing I get with traditionalists when they sort of say it's gotten so bad, men need to take the women back and fight for them and all this. But it's like, yeah, but the other side of it is, for what? If there's not an overwhelming sense that you're not going to be fucking castrated, fined, imprisoned, censored, or your life ruined for actually trying to be courageous. And this is a frustrating conversation I have with some women, is they still think that, even if they agree with me, they'll nod their heads to everything I'm saying in terms of the way the world is now. Women are unhappy. Men are silenced. Men are walking away. Men are going their own way. They're not getting married. Everything's going in decline and women aren't happy. And women's response is, yeah, men need to sort of just be more masculine and turn it around and basically take the bull by the horns. And it's frustrating to say, but there's no reason to, in terms of self-respect as a man. Why would I? Why would I debase myself? For what? What am I getting out of it? And two, even if there is something I want, the overwhelming case would be, I'll be fined, censored. I would have negative consequences. It's being a heretic in a gynocentric world. So that's the thing I think is very difficult for the horny, reproductively inclined younger male today, is what for? And even if I wanted to, I can't.
Men are finding out that the juice isn't worth the squeeze.
Oh, look, they know that, but it's, the double-edged sword you talk about, even as a man, in today's world, even if you sort of try and mitigate women out of the equation, just to try and sort of live a good life for yourself. I mean, I talk with some MGTOW guys, And their world, where they can actually feel free to be more of who they are and autonomous, is that they feel like they need to retreat from the world more and more, and not just physically in their lifestyle, but even the language. And for someone like me, that's the most frustrating bit, that I can't have conversations out there casually. It's not about fear the way I would with, say, you. I have to seek out, vet the pathways of conversation digitally, and not just in terms of masculinity, be able to talk with anyone at a coffee shop, male or female, just about the truth. That's where it frustrates me. And this isn't talking about sort of a horny young man full of testosterone. This is talking about men past middle age as well. That's become constricted in terms of older masculinity. Just being able to be a confident, intellectually curious person, wanting to engage with others and mentor and connect with the world. That's the part that frustrates me personally.
Well, I understand that. I mean, and here's where, I know I'll piss a couple of people off in the MGTOW community. I've seen the same thing that you've seen. And well, again, I want to be very clear that I'm incredibly supportive of the idea of MGTOW. But when I see guys, I'll give you one example, talking about relationships and saying, I can't deal with women because no matter what you do with women, you end up being wrong. And I think, what a fucking cowardly thing to say, that you can't know your values, know when you're right, know when you're wrong, and hold by that with a woman. How fucking weak are you? I mean, and it's not, I understand and get when a guy swears off women because they're petulant children, they're too much trouble, doesn't want to mess with them. I don't have a problem with that. I get it entirely. But when a guy plays this powerless routine, I can't go out in society, I can't interact with people, I can't be a part of the world, I can't communicate with a woman because she's always going to be right and I'm going to end up feeling bad. I'm like, Jesus Christ, man, what are you even sucking air for?
Yeah, look,
I just can't abide by that.
Yeah, it's almost like I don't disagree with you, but it's almost like I wouldn't put it as bluntly as that, but I can understand it, because it's almost like the father feeling sympathy for his son, and his son being like, oh, I can't talk to women, I can't do this, they walk all over me, I have no power. And you're so frustrated that you want your son to have balls because you love him. And
that is the feeling. That is and it is, yeah. And I'm a blunt person, and
it's not like you're shitting over men the way women do. It's like you feel such sympathy for men that you love, and you could see parts of yourself in them when you were younger, and you think, for fuck's sake, it's the older you trying to love a younger man in a mentoring elderly fashion, and that's the way men do.
And it's the masculine way, exactly, that men want to admire each other. They do. They want to be connected to men that they admire and who admire them. They actually want women to admire them too. But that's part of the masculine experience, is to earn respect, and that you hate to see your friends weak and giving up and throwing in the towel on lives. And it does. Generally, a good friend in masculine circles will sometimes get angry at you if they see you behaving this way. Yeah. And that's a function of love too.
I think maybe they're so used to being shamed as men by women that so now even tough love and the camaraderie, the fraternity of men trying to impart tough love to other men, like you're suggesting, it's all synonymous to them. It's like, oh, you're shaming me too. Yeah, I don't want to have anything to do with this world. I have no place in it. I mean, that's a broader conversation in and of itself that plays into this. But yeah, I feel like you said, if some guys kind of like, no, I don't want to have anything to do with women, they're too much trouble, fuck them. If it's not coming from a stance where they feel scared, it's not like I hate them for it, but it's like, fuck, man, don't throw your life down the toilet. You just be strong in your life for yourself. You don't want to have any, have that same attitude, but from a more self-actualized, confident standpoint where, fuck women, I'm going to live in my own little world, my own subjective solipsistic world. Women are too much trouble. The juice isn't worth the squeeze, as you said. That's very different from I can't, women won't let me, no matter what I do. That's
exactly what I'm saying. Yes.
Yeah, I get frustrated in that too, where like I want to give them sympathy. I don't want to shame them the way women have been, and I am not trying to, but I also don't want to coddle them and make them even more obsequious and weak. So then when they're out in the world, they're even more fragile, that they can't even look the cash register chick in the eye when they're scanning through their packet of chips. Yeah, I feel sympathy for men, and I know that the masculine way isn't to coddle them like their mother.
I'm not saying it's my job to tell any man what it means to be a man, but I will say from my personal perspective that men who have thrown in the towel and said, I can't, the world won't let me, that is ultimately the surrender of masculinity. It is. It is forsaking your own sense of masculinity. I believe very strongly. I believe in men carving out a place in the world. The world doesn't always cooperate, so be it. That means you got to strike the chisel harder and carve out a place for yourself in this world. But
when you look at it, masculinity, you could almost see it as a good way to be a man.
Yeah. Good enough for me. It works. And it doesn't have to involve, I don't like any shaming about you're not, man up, that sort of thing. Man up, go do what I do. That to me is rejection. I'm happy to flip those guys off. No problem.
I think in today's gynocentric world where nothing means anything, they kind of, where nothing can mean anything, like whether it's the genders or whatever, or they try and say that, well, masculinity can be anything. Today's masculinity needs to be redefined. They look at it almost like art. So, what is masculinity? There's no one way to look at it. Well, it's like, no, there is a way to look at it. Even if it was like art.
Masculinities.
Yeah. Well, even if you were to correlate it to art, I can look at art and I can tell you what's a piece of shit and what's good. It's the skill at being able to, like, different forms of art, music and whatever. There's someone that's just sort of gesticulating and kind of trying to be artistic, and there's someone who's actually skillful at being an artist in their own way. And I think masculinity, if you were to look at it that way, is someone, a self-respecting, skillful man who's confident. You can actually see it. So it's not you can be a weak masculine or a strong masculine or an unconfident masculine man. You can't. You can't be unconfident and masculine. You can't be unskillful, figuratively speaking, and unmasculine. There's a suggestion and an implication of like a high bar, a skillfulness to go about being a man, being a good man, not just because I am a male, I am by default masculine. No, you're not.
Well, it's sort of like pornography. I can't really define it, but I goddamn well know it when I see it. One of the things that Warren Farrell came up with, which really caught my attention a long time ago, back in '93 when he wrote The Myth of Male Power, was they did behavioral studies above Navy ships during emergency situations. And what they found was, with women on the ships, that during fires, that a man would grab, the doors on ships open with wheels, metal wheels on them that you have to open, that when there was a fire in a ship, that men, in order to get their comrades out of a room with a fire, would grab hold of a hot wheel and open the door, even though it burned their flesh severely. Not a single woman would do it.
Yeah.
None
Yeah.
of them. And that, to me, it runs into the area. I don't want to glorify disposability for men. I think we got to be cautious about that. But when I look at, are you willing to sacrifice to save the guy next to you? I want a masculine guy there.
Yeah, well, it's undeniable when you look at it. I don't like to admit it, but if I'm honest, I look at the male reflexes. Think about how many guys you probably would have had your ears privy to this more than I in terms of therapy and listening to men, is that men after breakups, divorces and severe trauma of that, like a lot of times they have the mentality, I'm going to end it all and she'll be sorry. Whereas women don't tend to have that mentality. They don't tend to sort of, I will sacrifice myself to prove my worth. They'll be sorry and then I'll be valued. If I end myself, I'll be valued then. Women don't think that way.
No, they don't. And guys, if you ever contemplate killing yourself in order, as a matter of retribution to a woman, the first thing she's going to wonder is if you're insured.
Yeah, I've said this story again, whether it's masculinity or whatever, and guys sort of feeling less anxious and finding stability mentally in this world, is the more you can sort of, don't disregard stuff that's worked for thousands of years and been passed on, like masculinity, femininity, the nature of men and women. If nothing means everything means everything and nothing means nothing, and you don't know what way up and down is, your world's just going to get worse. I've mentioned this story a few times. I remember a long time ago where I noticed a very big glaring difference in terms of what we were just talking about, in terms of a woman wouldn't sacrifice herself, whereas a man, his first instinct to show how much he loves is to sacrifice himself. I remember an old ex of mine, when things were going really well, and she would say to me, would you die for me? And then she followed that up by saying, because I'd kill for you. And I noticed, isn't that different?
Absolutely, no self-awareness to that whatsoever.
But that told me a lot about the nature of men and women and how we value each other and where we get off on it. Whereas men was like, yeah, I would die for you because I love you so much. And a woman would be, I would kill for you because I love you so much. Death plays a very different role.
Yes, absolutely. But men can get better. I'm living proof. When at my last divorce, my wife asked me if I had thought of suicide. I said, no, homicide.
Well, this video is not getting monetized.
Well, it'll join the ranks with others on my channel.
Yeah.